This is the GTX 1070 8GB. It's a 2.5 slot card and it comes courtesy of Palit. We're going to see how this performs today against some games and benchmarks at 4K, 1440p and 1080p. So why don't you come along for the ride with us? Okay, so first up today is Firestrike Ultra. We see 4K and a graphics score of 4165, an average of 19 FPS. 1440p is 830, graphics score with 37 FPS. 1080p has got us over the 60 at 63 FPS with a graphics score of 14122. 720p was predictably the best with 23820 graphics score and 105 FPS. Moving over to Night Raid, we see 4K, 24772 graphics score and 123 FPS. This is obviously not a very demanding benchmark. 1440p we see a massive increase at 46822 for the graphics score and 231 for FPS. However, we go down to 1080p and the increase is not as big, with 275 FPS and a 54993 score, and 720p is only slightly better, so it doesn't scale very well. It's a 279 FPS and a 55507 graphics score. Times by Extreme. At 4K we have a 2711 graphics score and a 17 FPS average. 1440p we see 5319 graphics score and a 33 FPS average. 1080p we see 8165 and a 50 FPS average, and at 720 we see 13044 with 81 FPS on average. Okay, with Dirt 5 at ultra settings for 4K resolution, 25 average FPS with a low of 12. High at 4K again is 36 average with a low of 18. And then low settings with 4K resolution, 54 on average FPS and 42 minimum at 1% lows. Moving on to the 1440p setting at ultra, 32 average FPS with a low of 13. At high at 1440p we see an average of 41 and a low of 19. And at 1440p low settings we see an average of 65 and a low of 48. And at 1080p with the ultra settings we see an average FPS of 37 and a low at 17. At 1080p high the average is 50 and the low is 21. And low settings at 1080p we come in with an average of 85 and a low of 58. So we can see from this slide that 4K is a real struggle for this card, and even low settings at 4K, it's only 54 FPS. It's doable, but it depends on if you like low settings. Okay, over to Unreal Tournament. And at epic settings at 4K we see an average of 48 and a low of 35. At high we see an average of 62 and a low of 43. And low settings is 123 and a 69 low. Going down to 1440p, epic settings, we see an average of 84 FPS and a low of 36. At high settings we see an average of 92 and a low of 32. And at low we see an average of 101 and a low of 49. Epic settings at 1080p, we see an average of 120 and a low of 93. And the two settings below epic, and I tried this more than once, seem to come in low and lower than epic. High settings at 1080p being 106 against 120, and low being 104 against 120, you would have expected the curve to have gone the other way. But in this game it didn't, even after rigorous testing. Okay, going over to Apex Legends at Epic 4K. The average is 41 and the minimum is 35. High settings at 4K we see an average of 39 and a low of 32, which is a bit less than the 4K. Again, probably just margin of error given it was only 2 FPS. Low at 4K gives us 52 FPS and a low of 44. 1440p at Epic was 75 average and 62 low. High settings were 79 average and 64 low. And at low settings we see an average of 99 and a low of 78. 1080p gives us the best result. Epic settings at 112 average FPS and a low of 87. High settings at 118 and a low of 94, and low is 141 and a low of 109. So if you're a player of this game, you could go 4K low. Realistically, I go 1440p Epic. 75's a good average, but if you need your FPS for accuracy, then low at 1080p is the competitive answer. Control. At high 4K, 50 average FPS and a low of 32. Medium is an average of 61 and a low of 42. And low is an average of 94 and a low of 55. 1440p high gives us 50 average FPS and 41 low. Medium gives us 64 average and 54 low. And low gives us 88 and a low of 63. 1080p high settings we see an average of 80 and a low of 62. Medium settings gives us 98 average and a low of 71. And low gives us 134 and a low of 66. So a bit of a mixed bag there. Again, with this type of game where shooting's involved, then it may be low 1080p. But if you're not such a Twitch shooter, then maybe medium 1440p, but it being over 60. Moving over to Fortnite. And boy did this card struggle. At 4K Epic, it came in with a whopping 28 average and 16 frames at 1% low. High settings was 101 and a low of 43. And our low settings was 170 and a low of 61. Epic at 1440p was an average of 55 and a low of 29. High was 104 and a low of 49, and low was 140 with a low of 75. Epic at 1080p was an average of 79, low of 44. High settings was 109 average and a low of 54, and 1080p low was 183 with a low of 83. So this card struggled with the Epic settings for some reason. At all levels bar maybe 1080p. High and low settings either 4K or 1440p. Best way to go. Even though 1440p low was beaten out by low 4K. World of Warships. Maximum settings of 4K. We see an average of 58, a low of 39. High settings we see an average of 74 and a low of 44. And low settings gives us an average of 74 and a low of 41. Maximum at 1440p gives us 75 average and a low of 55. High settings gives us 74 and 45. Low gives us 75 and 47. And I'm not going to go into the 1080p because you can see by this chart it seems to be limited at maximum of 75, 74. So At least you get over 60 with whatever settings you want, for the exception of maximum 4K. Forza Horizon 4. We only have the FPS average and nothing else. But here we go, ultra at 4K, 52 FPS. High 4K is 65 and low 4K is 79. Ultra 1440p 71. High 1440p is 83. Low 1440p is 90. Ultra at 1080p is 76. High is 85 and low is 96. So I would say with this game, if you can only run it at 1080p, then Ultra at 76 FPS is a very good option. Okay, moving on to Crysis. Very high at 4K, 54 average and 33 low. High 4K was 71 and 39 low. Low 4K was 118 average and 64 was the 1% low. Very high at 1440p gives us a result of 72 and 39. High 1440p is 86 and 50. Low 1440p gives us an average of 140 and the low 1% is 81. Very high at 1080p gives us an average of 67 and a low of 18. High gives us an average of 63 and a low of 35. And low gives us an average of 110 and a 1% low of 56. So again, another Twitch shooter type, but you could play 4K, you get over 70 FPS, but obviously the further down the stack you come, the better the FPS is, except for at 1080p, which seems to regress. Battlefield 5, at Ultra 4K is an average of 37 and a low of 11. High 4K is 41 average and 24 low. Low 4K is 55 average and 13 low. At 1440p Ultra, we see 56 as an average and 25 as the 1% low. High settings will be 64 on average and 25 low. And low settings would give us 81 and a low of 31. Ultra at 1080p gives us 66 on average and 26 low. High gives us 76 average and 28 low. And 1080p gives us, and low 1080p gives us an average of 82 and a low of 29. So progressively better all the way down the stack, except for the low 1440p, which sort of sticks out a little bit. Because of the low 1080p coming in at 82, well, I thought it would have come in a lot higher than that, but anyway, what do I know. So again, with it being a shooter type of game, low 1440p or even high. And in this instance, I wouldn't say 1080p would be any advantage, to be honest. Okay, Shadow of the Tomb Raider. 4K highest, 27 on average and 24 low. 4K high, 33 average and 24 low. And low settings is 43 on average and 27 as a 1% low. Highest at 1440p is 51 on average, 24 1% low. High settings comes in at 57 and 26 low, and low comes in at 67 and a 28 frame rate as a 1% low. Highest at 1080p comes in at 64 and a low of 27. High comes in at 67 and a low of 24, and low comes in at 71 and a low of 28. Even though this is an older game, it seems to struggle with this game, the card, but then the card's as old, if not older. So again, for me, I would stick to 1440p, but if you must have over 67 and you don't want to do low 1440p, highest 1080p is a good way to go. Going over to CSGO, high 4K comes in at 94 on average and 73 low. Medium comes in at 115 and 81 frame rate at low. Low settings comes in at 121, average FPS, and the low being 82. High 1440p is 104 and a low of 82. Medium is 110 and a low of 89. And low is 117 and a low of 74. High 1080p comes in at 89 average FPS and 87 low. Medium comes in at 94 high and 89 low, and low comes in at 106 and again 89 1% low. So again, you can play this at 4K, highest resolution, highest settings, 94 FPS, but with this being probably the ultimate shooter at this moment in time, even if not the best, you'd want to gain an advantage as much as you can, but the best is low settings at 4K with 121. Seems to be out everything else. But again, don't forget, they've all been tested rigorously. Right, going over to Rocket League. High quality 4K gives us 118 average and a 41 1% low. Quality 4K is 131 and a low of 55, and performance is 165 average and a low of 72. High quality at 1440p comes in at 145 and a low of 90. Quality is 205 and a low of 135, and performance is 223 and a low of 148. 1080p, we're looking at 138 high and 109 low. Quality, we're looking at 188 and a low of 132, and at performance we're looking at 234 average and 161 1% low. So again, another game that this card doesn't struggle to run, and if you're a casual gamer, high quality 1440p, high quality 4K. If you're competitive, again, you want to go for the highest frame rates, don't you? So performance of 1440p or performance at 1080p is the way to go for that one. And we finally come on to GTA 5. Very high settings at 4K, gives us an average of 80 and a low of 23. High settings at 4K gives us an average of 84 and a low of 27, and normal gives us an average of 100 and a low of 36. At very high at 1440p gives an average of 93 and a low of 37. High gives us an average of 101 and a low of 43, and normal gives us an average of 112 and a low of 48. At very high at 1080p we come in at 98 on average and a low of 43. High settings is 102, low 45, and the average for normal at 1080p is 113 and a low of 48. So this doesn't run too badly on this game. If you can do 4K, maybe normal settings is a nice one to go for. If you're going to do 1440p, high and normal, and at 1080p you could run really any of them because they're virtually all over 100. So that gives us GTA 5. Okay, so to sum up, the GTX 1070, 8 gig, solid performer. I think it's not the newest card, but I think if you can pick one of these up on the second-hand market fairly cheap, and I say if, but if you could, you know someone who's getting rid of one, and you need to upgrade to something, this is not a bad stopgap. It's a very heavy, bulky looking card, but to me that's making sense that they're getting better, getting a bit faster than what older cards were. So yeah, there you go. I think this is a good card, nice and solid. I think it'll work in most situations, barring the odd one or two, like Cyberpunk. I think it will struggle with that, to be fair. That's it. Another video comes to an end, and I'm sure you're all saying yay. But if you like this video, please comment, subscribe, do anything you want, give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you next time.